with me that if you look at the UFO community over the years, it's really often been a group of individuals, and I don't think we're particularly good at pulling together as a UFO community. I think it's been quite divided. It still is. There are quite a lot of different factions, and it's hard to draw it together. But I thought that the citizens' hearings was a really good attempt to present the best evidence to politicians who would normally go nowhere. They wouldn't go anywhere near the subject. So, I think it was a brilliant success for me. And as I say, whether it makes a breakthrough sooner rather than later, I hope so. But I think it will be seen as historic in time.
All right, cool. And moving to a totally different subject, I know you've written a film script all about the famous Rendlesham case. Can you sort of give us background and sort of information on where things are at with it right now?
Well, we've got a pilot for the Flying Lighthouse. It's all organised. I'm joking. I met Colonel Holt, Charles Holt, in a documentary, filming a documentary in December 2007 about Rendlesham, and I met him, and I had the opportunity to spend quite a few hours in the pub with him, believe it or not, before the filming actually began, as we both arrived at the hotel late evening at roughly the same time. And at the end of that first conversation, I said to him, has anybody thought about writing a film script based on what you know of the case, etc.? And he said, no, people thought about writing books, etc., but it's never happened, but nobody's mentioned film. I said, well, I kind of like dabble with writing screenplays. I'd written 3 prior to this, all UFO-related, coincidentally. Never meant to be, but that's the way it went. And he said, well, okay, then, So I said, well, what I'll do is I'll go away for about 4 months, 5 months, and review every bit of evidence I can find in the media, books, magazines, etc. I'll review all the evidence, put together a timeline, and then I'll come back to you in a few months' time and start firing questions at you. Is that okay? And he went, yeah, that's fine. And that's exactly what happened. I think it was 4 months later when I'd effectively researched the timeline. And then I just started winging emails to him left, right, and centre, and he would respond. Obviously, there's a time difference, but he would generally respond within hours the next day, and it went on like that. And I think after about a year, I had the first working draft of the screenplay. But as like anything else, things evolve and you redraft, and then other bits of information emerge, and you've got to check those out. And bear in mind that I wasn't, and I'm not, a professional screenwriter. So again, what I would do for validation, and it's something I've always done, is I am certainly open to constructive feedback and whatever. So I would send it off to screenwriters and say, would you review this for me and this, that, and the other? And they would come back, and generally it was positive, but they would say, it maybe needs this, it maybe needs that. And again, it's a learning process. But what I can say now is that probably after 5 years, by the middle of last year, I've got several screenwriters who reviewed it who basically said this is pretty good, and it's pretty much there on being ready to pitch to a producer. Now, basically, what they have said is that there's 2 versions of the script now. There's basically a feature film script, a cinema version, as it were, and then people are saying to me, well, actually, if you tell it blow by blow, it would make for a very good docudrama kind of TV series, 2 or 3 part series. Now, people have said to me, screenwriters have said, well, you should keep both, because they're both separate entities. If you want it as a feature film, you have to make it more character driven. And the problem, I wouldn't say it's a major problem, but there is an inherent problem with the Rendlesham stories, because effectively it's an ensemble piece over 3 nights of activity, 3 successive nights. So you've got different shifts, different people coming in and out of the script, and Hollywood would normally like to have a sort of kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Harrison Ford kind of hero. Well, we don't ever really get a hero of any type in the Rendlesham story. There are perhaps maybe 3 or 4 characters that I think you can develop, and that is essentially what I've done. So I've chosen 4 characters, 2 principal characters and 2 slightly less principal, to develop their characters. So the theatrical version, the cinema version, is much more character-driven, but it's not the big hero that Hollywood would want. Not that I would want Hollywood to make this kind of film, to be honest, because what I don't want it to happen is for it to be maimed and turned into Fire in the Sky, which was, Travis Walton will say that the scenes on the ground were very accurate, but as soon as he got into the abduction phase, it was a load of rubbish. So, that's what Hollywood does, and I'm determined, if I can, to hang on to the story to the point where somebody actually shares my belief that they want to do it for real, because the overriding thing that the screenwriters are still saying is that even though it doesn't follow the classic hero kind of characters, at the end of it, they're still riveted, and they come out at the end of it going, this really happened? And that's the whole point. That's exactly why it should be made into a film for me, because I'm not trying to convince people that E.T. is here, nice though that would be, but realistically, all what I would like to do is to make the man on the street, the woman in the street, think. And if they come out of the cinema going, this really happened, and these people are real, then I would come back at that thinking, job done. Because with the beauty of the cinema is that it would go around the world, and you would inevitably be doing the publicity and be talking about it, so it would raise the issue of the subject. And again, because I'm a credible person, then hopefully you're not going to be treated like an idiot. And if people actually liked the film and were amazed at what really went on there, and they came out of the cinema thinking this was real, then so many millions of people all around the world can suddenly have their perceptions changed almost in an instant over a matter of weeks of its release, that there really might be something to this subject. And that's what I'm really trying to do, is to reach a much wider audience than the people that go to UFO conferences.
Okay. And bearing all that in mind, would you say that Rendlesham is like one of the strongest cases for UFO reality in the UK?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah, it's very complicated, because there are so many people involved. It's very complicated because quite clearly some of the men were interrogated, and several people have gone on the record to say they were interrogated, so they corroborate some form of interrogation. It's not just one person that's saying that. There are certainly, with the Holt Memorandum, with that document, I think for me it's by far Britain's most famous UFO document, but arguably I would say it's one of the top ones in the world for the simple reason of what it says in it. It's only got 3 little paragraphs, but what they say is enormous. It says, from the deputy base commander of a nuclear base, and it was a nuclear base because I worked on an identical base at RAF Larbrook in West Germany. It's an identical weapons storage area when I was in the Royal Air Force Police. So we are talking nuclear weapon base here, and what that first paragraph says, written by Holt, is that there was a confirmed landing of something physical landed in the woods that left ground depressions. The second paragraph talks about ground depressions and that the background radiation peaked only 8 times. It's not about how much, it's about the fact that the Geiger counter only peaked in the indentation, the pod marks. That's the key thing, that there was evidence of a blast zone, broken branches, etc., etc. There were physical evidence recovered in terms of the plaster casts, etc. And then, of course, you have Holt on his night going out with a team of specialists. They go to the landing site, verify that there's ground depressions 2 days afterwards, and then they see UFO, follow it through the trees. They see it in an open field. The UFO is to the left of the farmhouse, and the lighthouse is 6 miles off on the right of the farmhouse. And the red object suddenly divides into 5 white objects that then disappear. Then they cross the field. They go to the across the creek, up into the second farmer's field, where they see multiple objects in the sky, to the left, to the north, to the south, and then one of the objects comes and stops above their head, shines a beam down from about 1,000 feet, close to where they're stood. Holt is there. He's the deputy base commander of a nuclear facility, and he's thinking, is this a threat? Is this a communication? They're all in awe. And then one of the objects is seen moving towards Bentwaters. He can't see exactly where that is, so he turns his radio frequency to the tower, weapon storage area tower, and he can hear the fact that beams are being shone down from a UFO into the nuclear storage bunkers. Now, that is big news. And for him to write that is an exceptional document, and you really don't get that anywhere. And so for me, it's a much stronger case than Roswell, although that's a brilliant case, but this is a much more modern case with people that are all alive. But it's complicated because clearly there was a cover-up strategy in place, and I would have to say that it's pretty much worked. Holt has always said that the cover-up began with disinformation and people being interrogated, and one of those, he has always said that Larry Warren, with his Capel Green story, was one of those, that he had a false memory implanted. And that, if that is true, then that has worked fantastically well, because it really created the enormous difficulties between all the relevant parties on all the different nights, and people saying, well, you know, it doesn't tally with Larry Warren, you know, what's real, what's not. So I think from a security point of view, that disinformation exercise, if true, works fantastically well. But the reality is that we're never going to get 100% pieces of the jigsaw in the Rendlesham case. It's too complicated and too much has been lost already. But as was recently, if you go to Robert Hastings' book, UFOs and Nukes, well, he came across the two of the people that were in the air traffic control tower, so not US Air Force police officers, who finally went on the record, were named, and went on the record in his book saying that on the night that Holt was out, they saw a UFO on radar and visually. So again, this is other departments, as it were, corroborating the fact that there was UFO activity at the base. So for me, it's a tremendous case, but very complicated. But I always say to people, if we had a 100-piece jigsaw and we had 70% of the pieces, which is I think where we've got, on 70% of the pieces in that jigsaw, we'd be able to tell you what that picture was about. And I think that's where we're at.
All right, cool. Well, that gives us sort of a good place now to sort of take a break and pick up when we come back right afterwards from a short commercial break. And just a reminder to our audience, you can visit our website and find out more about Epic Voyages at epicvoyages.com, or visit our YouTube channel, Epic Voyages, for free video presentations. And with that said, we're just going to take a quick break. Hi, this is Nick Redfern again on Epic Voyages, and our guest this evening is Gary Heseltine, and we're talking about a wide range of subjects, particularly Gary's research into UFO encounters in the UK involving British police officers, but also his sort of very proactive research and investigations and just general digging into other aspects of the UFO field as well. And one of the things I want to bring up with you, Gary, is apparently you've got a new online magazine. Can you talk about that and what it is and its goals and so on?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Yeah, realistically, about a year before I decided to retire, I had the idea, I think it was in August of 2012, so maybe about 7 months before I actually retired, to launch an online magazine. Obviously, over the last 11 years of doing UFO conferences and meeting various researchers from around the world, and obviously as I've got more well-known within the field, I've obviously pretty much met everybody who